Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Fragomeni. I am a priest, actually, of the Diocese of Albany in New York.
Oh.
And my father, the last name actually is Calabrese, but it's of Greek origin, Fragomenos, which means a collector of strange objects, actually. And so I find myself here in Chicago for 23 years. I was recruited by the Catholic Theological Union down the road from Loyola and in Hyde Park. We are a member of the cluster of theological schools with the University of Chicago. And I've been a professor of sacramental theology and preaching there for the past 23 years, and just promoted actually to the full professor position. And when I told my mother, who's from Lima, which is outside of Naples in the province of Benevento, I told her I was promoted to full professor. She said, "Full of what?" Such is the academic distinction. I have also been the rector of the Shrine of Our Lady of Pompeii, a freestanding shrine here in the Archdiocese that now will celebrate next year, in 2014, its 20th anniversary. Formerly a parish, no longer a parish, and works as in an inner city center of Italian spirituality. I've been the rector there for 9 years, but my first job is to be an academician. So when Dominic invited me to come to this symposium, I prepared what I thought needed to be an academic discussion, but in view of the conversations that you've been having and the kind of narrative style that has been part of the conversation, I've decided to take what was an academic piece and turn it into a more of a narrative discourse with you. They've given me 45 minutes, and it is now 4:25, and so 45 minutes would take us to about 10 minutes after 5, is that correct? And this gives us then 20 minutes to prepare for the celebration of the Eucharist at Madonna della Strada, which is right down the road from us. So let me tell you my delight in the idea of this. Let me tell you my fear in what you have asked me to do for this, because the title of the presentation as it's slated is Chicago Italian Catholicism for the 21st Century. So that key word is for the 21st century. So you're asking me, in a sense, to be a soothsayer of sorts, predicting what should Italian American Catholicism be for the 20th century. And since I'm not a soothsayer or a fortune teller of any sort, I can, in this presentation, simply offer to you in 4 parts what I think are the present signs that invite us today to be prepared for whatever the future may bring. Because what we are engaged in as Italian Americans here in the United States is the realization that our children and our children's children and our children's children's children who have blood among them, who are Italian resource, that they are intermarrying, even though I understand that the young people here all said that they would marry Italians. Well, they say, the Pascal said, you know, the heart has reasons that reason doesn't understand, and certainly falling in love would be an important thing. When my brother announced that he was marrying someone Polish, my mother would not talk to him for about a year, because she said Polish women can't cook. Now my mother has changed her tune, because my sister-in-law is quite a lovely, charming person, and has learned to be Italian through marriage. So my job is to take you through 4 parts, which I will, rather than read to you as a text, I will simply narrate to you as I see what Catholicism, and certainly what Italian American Catholicism, could be for the 21st century here in this Archdiocese of Chicago, but more generally, I think, throughout the United States and Canada, in the Northern American regions. And again, I'm not a soothsayer. All I am is someone who can read the signs of the time with an eye towards what are the dynamics that are happening now that seem to be what will be flourishing later. And so it's in 4 parts. And so I'd like to begin part number one by showing you a book. This book is indeed a scholarly study, but it's for anyone who's interested in religion and religious development from the past, especially the generational past that we've faced as Italian Americans, and the way in which it evolves, and it is evolving through the changing demographics in what you might call a post-traditional society. This book I found invaluable for preparing this paper for today. And I recommend it to any of you who may be interested. It's entitled Religion as a Chain of Memory. And the author is Danielle Hervieux-Leger. And this text that we have here is published in 2000. So it's section 3 was the most valuable for me. And my first part is really a summary of her metaphor. Because the metaphor that is used is that religious experience, or religion, in this case, Italian-American religious practices, are really a chain of memory. And I would like to suggest that that metaphor means that what we do religiously and what we're attempting to do, even by a symposium like this, is to simply keep the links of that chain intact. Because there has been a fear, and there continues to be a fear, that somehow what we have cherished most as Catholics, but the subset of that, as Catholics who are Italian-American, the fear is that we're losing something in that chain of memory, because somehow in this post-traditional society, these links are breaking. And we're looking somehow to keep these links going, because the book describes religion as both a cultural enterprise and a religious enterprise. And certainly for Italian Americans here, being Roman Catholic and being Italian, we're very much linked. I teach, I forgot to mention to shut off cell phones. That was a great indicator. Thank you. If anyone has a link outside of this building, that I would ask you to break the chain and to simply make sure that your cell phones, I'm going to make sure mine is off as well, because it gets embarrassing even in church. This happens. So thank you for that reminder. So break the chain. The religious tradition and the cultural tradition have been linked for centuries. To be Italian-American was to be Roman Catholic. To be Greek was to be Greek Orthodox. To be Mexican is to be Roman Catholic. And yet somehow we also are seeing that even among the Mexican communities, the evangelical churches are catechizing and proselytizing them, so that to be Mexican does not necessarily any longer mean be Roman Catholic. Just like it doesn't mean to be Italian-American, it means to be Roman Catholic. My aunt, for instance, became a Jehovah's Witness when I was a child. I remember this. And there are relatives on my mother's side who are Episcopalians. Because as they enculturated here in the United States and intermarried with other cultural traditions, you do find that there is this breaking of the chain, and that the religious experience of Catholicism is not always synonymous with being Italian, and vice versa. This is a reality that she describes in this book, and I would just like you to consider this. I teach at, not only do I teach at the graduate school in Hyde Park, but I teach at the rival school, the other rival Catholic university, as an adjunct professor. I teach at DePaul University. I'm teaching a course on Christianity, mysticism, and the occult. And we max out at about 40 students, so I have 40 students in the classroom every Monday night for their quarter system, the 10-week system. And in my classroom, I did a survey in preparation for this to see how many of these young adults in a Catholic university believe in God anymore. Now this is DePaul, and it may not have as rich of a Catholic identity as a university such as this, shepherded by an Italian-American Garanzini. But certainly at DePaul University, my 40 students, 2/3 of them have no God image in their chain of memory, none at all. Of the 1/3 that are believers in God, half of them are Catholics. And of that half who are Catholics, half of them go to church on Sunday on a regular basis. I delight at the report that I hear of the young people that were at this campus and who spoke to us. I delight that unanimously that they would marry Italians and that they're practicing Roman Catholics. And yet at the same time, I don't think demographically that is indicative of that which is really happening in this country among the young people who claim, at least at DePaul, in my course, this very simple sample, that they are spiritual but not religious. And some of them are Italian Americans. And so the reality is that the chain of memory is being broken. And it has been broken. Even in this archdiocese, the number of national churches, and I'm not only talking the Italian national churches, but the Polish national churches and the German, the Irish national churches, have been, the memory of that original national identity has been severed. Some of them have been closed. The speaker here that just spoke about the Santa Maria Laurentano, I believe, was that the society that was a society looking for a church because their churches were being closed. And it's happened. It happened when the Scalabrinians left the old historic neighborhood, and the Shrine of Our Lady of Pompeii, as it's now called, was simply going to be torn down and sold. The chains were being broken. That's a phenomenon, and we can't be in denial about it. And we're in changing demographics, even when you find other national churches that are still existing, that are finding themselves shifting the nationality that is the centerpiece of their identity. It shifts. Now in Chicago, however, one of the national churches that remains very strong, actually, is the Polish churches. It's incredible. And the reason why, at least in the study that I've made, is because there are still souls of Polish immigrants that are still coming into this city. And certainly the Mexican churches are growing in abundance. At Catholic Theological Union, we teach the Scalabrinian Fathers, or at least we did. I'm not sure, this year we don't have any Scalabrinian students. But even the Scalabrinian Fathers, who originally were created and then emigrated here to the United States from Italy, were to support Italian immigrants. But now their ministry and vocation has shifted to support the other kinds of immigrants that are very prolific here in the U.S., especially the Mexican immigrants. In fact, you have one of my students, Miguel Alvarez, who I understand is a good preacher and a good student. I taught him preaching and I taught him presiding. And I'm glad that I could, as an Italian American, celebrate and encourage a young Mexican Scalabrinian to serve the Italian community and the Mexican community in Melrose Park as well. There's always links, but they're being severed. And if we are in denial of this, then we will not be able to look farther into the 21st century. That's my first point. This is the book. I highly recommend it as a wonderful scholarly piece for this conference and for its attendees. The second point that I'd like to make is that what has caused the breakingness of what are some of the causes that the chain of memory that is the Italian-American Catholic imagination, what are some of the causes that have happened that have broken this link? Well, first, I believe the neighborhoods have changed. That's an inevitable part. I mean, I hear still, as the rector of the little Marian shrine there, that has no parishioners, has no membership. We simply have affiliates who come and attend and celebrate there like we did this morning for a 9 o'clock funeral of a man from the neighborhood, for the 11 o'clock Veterans Day celebration in which I presided, for a 2:30 wedding that I just come from, and to this wonderful august group that I've been looking forward to sharing with. So the neighborhoods have changed. It's hard-pressed to say that the near West Side is any longer an Italian neighborhood. Hard-pressed. It's a multicultural neighborhood. And the demographics certainly shifted when the neighborhood, the Italian immigrant neighborhood, was decimated by the highways, by the university, etc., etc. So one of the causes that the chain breaks is that the neighborhoods themselves broke. Many of our children and our grandchildren have flown to the suburbs, or have flown to St. Louis, or have flown to other parts of the United States or other parts of the world because of the diversity of which their education and the diversity of their interest for work has taken them. Look at me, I'm a New Yorker. I'm a New York Giants fan. And I was glad that the Bears won yesterday, but my blood and my heart doesn't beat any faster when they do, because I'm from New York. But I've been transported here on special assignment to teach in Hyde Park. So the neighborhoods are broken. A second indicator, it seems to me, is that there is a parochialism that has caused the Italian community itself to be shattered. When I came here from New York, I was shocked at the fact that we could get mayors elected in New York City, an Italian governor elected in New York State. But I was shocked that the Italian community was so broken in the sense of, in the various parochial setting of the Sicilians and the Calabresi, and how many St. Rocco societies are there? I mean, there's all of these 5 St. Rocco societies, all because of a certain testa dura, it seems to me. The regional parochialism that we brought to this country and that served us well as Italian Americans and as a member of that community for 23 years now in Chicago. Those cluster groups of Sicilians and Barese and the Calabrese that served us well in the past will not serve us in the 21st century because there has been a blend. And even these wonderful children who said they marry Italian, they may not marry from their own region in Italy. And so one of the causes of the breakup of the chain seems to me to have been this parochialism that still hangs over us in many ways. There is also the generational shifts that have occurred. My brother's children know that they are both Italian American and Polish American, and have no interest in either. Because when I interviewed them for this presentation, I asked them, well, are you identifying as an Italian American? They're 20 in their mid-20s. Or Polish American? They go with neither, we're just Americans. So there is the realization that the generations have, in a sense, mainstreamed what our immigrant ancestors are brought to this country, and it's shifting gears with the question of self-identification in the case of some of these young people. And it's not just among the Italian Americans, it's also among the Irish, and it's among the Polish, and it's among the German, etc., etc. As the generations water themselves out, as the bloodlines thin, the chain breaks. That's at least another indicator for me. And the final indicator that I have here is the realization that the country itself, the United States, has become a post-Christian country and a post-traditional country, and we're battling now as a country with what to do with the immigrants that are coming in as a country. This is brand new, because the Statue of Liberty welcomed all kinds of immigrants. And now we put up fences to prohibit people and set up all kinds of barriers for immigration. And in fact, we still are in the throes of immigration laws that are battling over one another. This is another thing for the breaking of the chain. That somehow we're living in a country where we're becoming more and more, quote, American, closing off our boundaries to new immigrants, and then how can we, who are children of immigrants, continue to do what we do, passing on our Italian heritage, when there are new immigrants that are coming in that even we are included in shutting off. There's a certain hypocrisy in at least in my psyche of this, that many times we want to disclude the very immigrants that our ancestors were to a country that welcomed them then. But the question is, who are we welcoming and how are we welcoming them now? This is a big issue. And you know the whole battle politically for this. It's a big political football. It's a big issue in this country, in this city. If you go down into the Southwest, I was just lecturing in Texas twice. I was in Houston and Lubbock, Texas. Lubbock, Texas. I had a lecture for catechists and Catholic school principals. And it was just obvious to me that there is this struggle still going on with a certain kind of reverse nationalism. Reverse nationalism. And then the chain breaks. Because even my father, God rest his soul, disliked the fact that in Schenectady, New York, we were getting Mexicans. And the churches were beginning to speak Spanish. And seminarians in the Diocese of Albany, and even in this Archdiocese of Chicago, are mandated to learn Spanish as their second language. Because of the number of Mexicans that are Catholics now, and that are keeping our churches open. And my father, God rest his soul, my father said, darn those new immigrants. We had to learn English. Nobody talked Italian to us. Why are we now bowing down and learning Spanish for them? That attitude may be among your neighbors and relatives and friends because it's certainly in my DNA. But the reality is it's a kind of a reverse thing that can break the chain. Because these are immigrants like our ancestors. And what is it that we do as United States citizens, not only as Italian Americans, as U.S. citizens about immigration reform? And certainly the bishops of the United States are going to be talking about that. They're meeting next week in Baltimore. And it's a big issue. These are some of the indicators to me that the chain has been broken. One last one that I wrote extensively about, but I won't bore you with it, was the fact that there is a sense among the generations, including adult generations, that Catholicism, regardless of the nationality, is only one of many religious experiences that you can now choose from and be saved. One of the many religious traditions. And there are among us and among many generations all kinds of religious window shoppers. Just like there are, just like in Catholics, there are parish window shoppers. People go to this parish, well, I like that. No, I don't like this priest, I'm going to that parish. And there's no longer any identification with community. It's usually then around whether or not people enjoy or like or whatever the liturgy and the preaching that's going on in their churches. Very strange, breaks the chain. Now these are indicators. In a sense, you could say, I've just given you a slew of bad news. So now the question is, well, what are the good news? What are some ways that we can link the chain back, or at least keep the chain from breaking anymore between our Italianicity and the wonderful Italian heritage that we have in our blood and our Catholicism? What are some of the ways of linking? This is a set of suggested ideas to consider. We have some time before I give you the list. I have 5 of them that I want to give you. Talk to me. We're a small group. Could you stand when you speak so they can all see you and hear you? Yes, sir.
Yes, I'd like to add to what you talked about breaking the chain and the list of components. I'd like to add one.
Yeah.
One of them has been the church itself. You
Ah.
mentioned earlier that the Scalabrini changed their mission. They essentially abandoned Italian Americans. They made a business decision that there is no such thing as Italian American spirituality. We're going to focus on Mexican immigrants. If you would come to Mount Carmel on Good Friday night, where we have a Verna di Santi, we have a 950-seat church that's literally filled with Italian Americans from all over the Chicago area with their unique traditions, that this is the only place they can go to. And the Scalabrini have thrown that out. They feel that they don't need to, that's not a valid, a viable community anymore. And secondly, the absolute wreckage of the Second Vatican Council that essentially told us back in the 1960s, that you can't take your statue out and have processions anymore. You can't display your statue in the church. You either got to put it away for the feast, or okay, as a compromise, we'll let you build a little chapel in the corner. So it was that kind of mentality that said to Italian Americans, this is not who you need to be anymore. This is shameful. This is old world. This isn't in the spirit of the Second Vatican Council. So that, and then the actions of the Scalabrini have decimated us.
Sure. Thank you for that, Sharon. I will pick up your second point because it's one of mine, the whole question of devotion. That's a breakage of the link. But I'm not sure I would credit that to the Second Vatican Council.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I would credit it as I'm going to do in this part. But just any others about this first part before we go into the second piece? So here is what I think are some ways of relinking the chain. Let's start with the devotion. That was number 4 on my list, but we'll pull it up. The Sacred Constitution on the Liturgy, which was published in 1963, will be 50 years old this December 3rd. And it's very clear in that document that the devotions of the Catholic people are not to be relegated to the background, but that the devotional life of the Church, this is the official document of the Council, that the devotional life of the Church was to engage indeed in a new way, i.e. grounded in the Scriptures, grounded in the rich theological tradition, a Mariology in the case of your Madonna. And the reality is that in many churches throughout the world, that section of the document which is present was either ignored, misinterpreted, or thrown out. So what you're describing so passionately, actually, I'm feeling, is something that is not in the council itself, but was the way in which it was either not interpreted or misinterpreted by a particular leadership in any parish. Because if you go to the Polish churches never lost that.
Well, they were more recent immigrants.
No. They were here in the 1960s as well. So the Polish churches, these big ones, Holy Trinity, for instance, St. Stanislaus, that has shifted gears, by the way, to it became a Mexican church. But these churches were loaded, they never lost that. In many cases, it was not the council. It was the way in which the council was appropriated by the local leadership that became problematic. So the first thing that I would like to suggest in the 21st century is that we find a way in which, as an Italian-American community in Chicago, in its diversity, can create ways of retrieving these devotions or keeping them alive, because in many cases they are already alive, not allowing them to die, but keeping them alive or retrieving them from the past. And there are many of them. The St. Joseph table is packed even at our shrine. We're going to have a problem this year because our school second floor is being rented, and so we're going to have we get 1,000 people to come and eat at the St. Joseph table, and it becomes difficult to feed them. But they're there from every nationality and every group. My hunch is that even our Good Friday celebrations, which we share, by the way, with the Latino communities, in the little village here, right, down the road, the little village has the same kind of Cristo Morto, the dead Christ processions, that they celebrate as well as we were Italians. celebrate that. To keep those alive is indeed one way of activating the spirituality, even to people who only come to that and never come to church any other time of the year. To this end, I would like to recommend another book. And this is by a fellow who teaches at Northwestern University. He's an Italian-American. His name is Robert Orsi. And if you don't know this book, I would recommend it. It's in its third edition. This is how good this book is. It's a sociological study of faith and community in Italian Harlem between the years 1880 and 1950. It's called The Madonna of 115th Street, Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And basically he talks about the shifting demographics of that neighborhood and how the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel continues, but the leadership is not always all Italian anymore. And how this Italian community had to face what some Italian communities continue to face here in Chicago and around our world. How do you integrate other immigrants into what is the best of our Italianicity? So this is a classic book, The Madonna of 115th Street, and it's in its third edition by Robert Orsi, who actually was here, I understand, on Tuesday addressing the Jesuit community.
Yeah, another conference.
Another conference from the Jesuit community. This man would be someone to pick his brain, because I think he would agree with me that the way to start linking the chain is keeping the devotions alive. But be careful. Keeping the devotions alive with a second piece that I think we have to retrieve, and that is with the best hospitality that we know how to muster as Italians. Because we are noted for our hospitality. We are noted for our ability to welcome everyone at our table. It took my mother about a year to welcome her Polish daughter-in-law, but finally she welcomed her. And in a sense, the challenge is a spiritual sense for us personally and as a community into the 21st century, and that is to denationalize without deculturalizing our identity. By that I mean to take from us the very severe and at times very sour, it creates what the Italians call agita. The agita, the sour nationalism, and allow that nationalism to be healed by God, or the Spirit, or by La Madonna, so that we, as people of great hospitality, can be denationalized, but not deculturalized. To take what's best of our Italian culture, and for me, what's best is hospitality. Italian restaurants, welcome everybody. The Italian community is invited into the 21st century to realize that we are, like this community in Harlem, in the city, is to know how to keep the devotion that was inspired by our Italianicity alive, and to include others in that devotion by an act of hospitality, to denationalize nationalism and never to lose the cultural richness. That, I think, is one of the challenges that face us as we continue. So, the keeping alive of the devotions and the way of hospitality. The third, I have 5. The third is, have we explored the full use of the technology that is coming more swiftly than we can ever imagine? The full use of technology. Now, I'm not a technological wizard. I am not a geek. I'm a sacramental theologian. But when I see what my school is doing, and what my school is doing, it's doing online teaching degrees. We actually are producing, I don't know if you must do them here, full degrees. Can I do a full degree? We are offering at Catholic Theological Union full degrees online. And so one of the great opportunities of the Italian community is, how do we engage technology in a way that will allow all who view us, see us, experience us, encounter us, around the world, to appreciate the richness of this tradition that we don't want to lose. We don't want the chain to break any more than it's broken. The fourth is the consideration of the leadership. That as the leaders, the religious leaders, whether we're ordained religious leaders or whether you are non-ordained religious leaders in the Italian community representing something of that link between ethnicity or Catholicism and Italianicity, whatever leaderships, what is the future will depend upon how well we as leadership are opened to the possibility of dialogue. And one of the wonderful things about Italians is that we have very famous philosophies of leadership in our repertoire. One is, of course, the great Machiavelli, who writes about the fact whether a leader should be rather interested in either being liked or being feared. And his answer, of course, was Italian leaders should be feared. And certainly we have a history here in the United States, especially in Chicago, of feared, underground, surreal Italian leadership. When I go to different parts of the United States, oh, you're from Chicago and you're Italian, boom, boom. Thinking no doubt of that man who's buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery, right next to Mrs. Scafuri. And Frank Rita, we're thinking about Al Capone, certainly. Should leadership be feared or loved? And I'm thinking that for the 21st century, that we need to be loved. And that the leadership, whether it be the lament of the Scalabrinian leadership, which, again, I would not use the word abandoned. I think what they did was, again, the word I would use is that they began to realize that their charism was to serve immigrants. And there were different kinds of immigrants in the United States that they began serving. And so I do understand some of the emotionality underneath that. And certainly it took a long time for me as the rector of the Shrine of Our Lady of Pompeii to help the neighborhood people, the remnants of the Italians, to get over the fact that they too felt abandoned by the Scalabrinians to the point that our buildings were going to be sold and just simply destroyed because there was no other constituents in the neighborhood to take over that place. We weren't as fortunate as other communities where there are other immigrants coming in for the sake of the buildings that we want to preserve. So I think that leadership among us has to find a conversion. This is a very Catholic metaphor, a conversion. The word conversion in Greek is metanoia, or metanoia, which literally means in Greek to go beyond the mind. So the fourth thing about the future of the 21st century, the spirituality and the Catholicism, is that we who are Italian Americans need to ask the Spirit to help us go beyond our present conditioned minds, to realize that the world that we knew is post-traditional now. And that to be open to our Catholicism and our Italianicity also means a hospitality to Jews and to Muslims and to atheists. As we see our own Holy Father, who is Argentinian, but has as much Italian blood in his veins as I do in mine, because his parents were immigrants to Argentina. This man is a signal, I think, not only to the whole church, but especially to the leadership here for the 21st century. He's open to it all, even to atheists, even to gay and lesbian people. That's going to be a challenge that we're going to face in the 21st century. And he's called for a synod on family life, two-part synod. And he's done a survey, creating a survey for the whole world to participate in if we want. So that he, with his Italian heart from Argentina, beats in dialogue. And I think that we take a lead from him in the 21st century about what it means to be open to the possibility of the other, so that our Italian hospitality is not simply a hospitality to the Sicilians, and to the Calabrese, and to the Neapolitans, and to the Bades, and to those from the north that never really migrated because they were the rich people and stayed in Italy, but to the southern ones that came to this part of the world, that our hospitality has to be opened in dialogue, and that's where leadership comes in. This is where leadership comes in. And certainly because the Shrine of Our Lady of Pompeii is unique, a unique place in the sense that we are not a parish in any way, shape, or form, can no longer do catechesis, initiation. We have no school, we have no parishioners, we have nothing of that sort. One of the things as a leader there that I'm negotiating with our staff for the 21st century is how can we fulfill our mission as Italian Americans, as a spiritual center, to create dialogue with Muslims and Jews. And I'm happy to announce that this group, that we're planning a conference, actually, maybe for some funding from our own, a conference about Mary. Mary as a Jewish woman, Mary as a quintessential Muslim woman. She's the only woman in the Quran that is named. In the Quran, Mary, our mother, the one we love so much, La Madonna, is the only woman named by name in the Quran. And so we already are working together to create an academic conference, a pastoral conference with dialogue. That's the future where we as Italians can take leadership in the spiritual revolution that is occurring and not pretend it's not occurring. And finally, the place, locations, our buildings. We, as spiritual centers, certainly here in this archdiocese, in this vicinity, we have Casa Italia, which is a cultural center, but cultural and spiritual are wed. It too was a Scalabrini campus that is now being run by lay leadership who have vision to keep on that campus the processions, and for instance of Francesco di Paolo from Calabria, the Calabrese go there, and other devotional procession places. We see that there. And we pray that those who are investors there will have enough successors and enough wherewithal to keep that investment going, because it's an important place for the Italian-American heritage, spiritual heritage, in the 20th century to keep alive. All the other buildings that are Italian-American heritage are owned by the Archbishop of Chicago as sole proprietor, corporation sole. All the other churches, Assumption Church, that was once an Italian community. Some of the other churches, Our Lady of the Rosary Church, that once was an Italian community. These are shifting demographics, and in 10, 20 years, my only concern is the place. Where is the place that will be designated by the Archbishop of Chicago as a place to enshrine the cultural, spiritual, and religious treasury of the Italian American community? This is going to be problematic. I'll be long dead and gone, and others will have to deal with this, because without a place, the chain gets really broken. This is why people fight for their place. Because and in fact, they fight for the same seat in some of our churches. And if you take out their pew, watch out. But the whole question of place, which we are not in control of, except the Casa, as a spiritual, cultural center primarily, this is going to be an issue into the 21st century that we're going to have to face. We're lucky now. We have some of it now, but everything changes. Closing story, and it's now just about 10 after. I said I'd like to conclude. Closing story. I told us at Columbus Day, at the Columbus Day Mass that we have at the Shrine of Our Lady of Pompeii. Once upon a time, there was an Italian who worked in the lumber yards. And he went to confession to a priest, and he says, "Bless me, Father, I've sinned. I've stolen some lumber." The priest says, "You know that's a sin. Stop stealing lumber. Say 3 Hail Marys and sin no more." A few weeks later, he comes back, "Father, I'm really sorry. I stole some more lumber from the lumber yard." The priest says, "That's terrible. Why do you do this?" He says, "I can't help myself. It's there and it's not being used. I take it. I'm sorry. Forgive me." "All right," he says, "now for your penance, I want you to say a whole rosary and sin no more." Oh, the phone again. "For your penance, you'll say a whole rosary." So the priest says, "For your penance, say a whole rosary and go out and sin no more." So he comes back in about a month, the same man, and he says, "Father, I'm sorry. I stole some more lumber." The priest says, "Are you kidding?" He says, "This is serious, mister." He says, "Do you know how to make a novena?" And so the man said to the priest, "Father, if you got the blueprints, I got the lumber." I'm not sure what the blueprint is going to be in the future for the Italian-American Religious Spiritual Center. I just know that we're building on a very good blueprint from the ancestry that we have inherited here. And certainly with all the good work that all of you who will represent various constituencies of the Italian community, the blueprints that you're continuing to develop. But the blueprint into the future may be more challenging and more difficult than we realize, especially with all the breaking of the chain that is occurring, at least the way I'm perceiving it. It may be different. But the good news that I want to leave you is we got lumber. And it ain't stolen lumber, it's inherited lumber. We have inherited some of the finest lumber to build a culture and a spirituality that no other culture or spirituality has. We have the Italian richness of a past so rich that people still listen to Italian opera. People still thrill over Italian art. People still weep over Italian literature. The lumber that we have received, we are responsible. This generation, and most of us are the passing generation. Most of us are in the last quarter of our lives. That we have to pass on as a lumber to these kids, these young ones who will build into the future a blueprint that yet is to be drawn. May God draw that blueprint. And may Our Lady watch over this community. And may all the ancestors who made sacrifices for us to sit here tonight, may they also, in the great communion of saints, pray for us. Until at last we celebrate the kingdom of God with great Italian food and music at the banquet table of heaven.